The last film I made before turning to novel writing was this film called Saul and Ruby's Holocaust Survivor Band. And it was about these two Holocaust survivors who formed a band in their well, in the case of Saul, he was 90, and in the case of Ruby, he was 86. Uh, and I had just finished another film, was looking for my next subject, and a friend of mine showed me this story in the New York Times about Saul and Ruby, and I immediately fell in love with them. There was also a short trailer piece about them, like just a 2-minute piece on who they were. That was very well done, and I figured, oh God, I missed this story. There's some filmmaker already got to them and was about to write it off. But my friend said, you don't know that for certain. You should at least reach out to them, see what's going on. So I did, and it turns out this person was not making a film on them. They just made a short piece. So I jumped on the phone, got a hold of Saul, and said to him, I'm coming out. I'll be there tomorrow. I jumped the plane from Chicago to Miami the next day and met with him and got him to agree to let me follow the two of them over the course of time. That So I am Jewish myself, and out of I've been making films at that time for 35 years, and I had never made a Jewish themed film. So this was very personal for me. This was really a passion project. I had a slush fund that I used to fully fund the film. There was no time to raise funds for this. Given their age, I thought they could die at any moment. And so followed them over 3 years. And part of that meant that we'd go back to, their goal was to go back to Poland, to play their music around the country and eventually go back to where they were from. And so we went back to Poland and filmed in Krakow, filmed in Warsaw. Krakow is an amazing city because it's so well preserved. And whereas Warsaw had been destroyed, it had been flattened. So all the buildings there were built post-war. Krakow looks just as it did in 1939, basically. It's the same cobblestone streets, the same buildings. And Saul, in following him through Krakow, gave me the most amazing research I could ever ask for to write this novel. I had no idea at that time that I was going to write a novel. That wasn't even in my mind. I was making a film. It wasn't until I finished the film, we released it in January of 2020. COVID was in the background at that point. So we had a great screening at the Miami Jewish Film Festival, won the Grand Jury Prize. We were the opening film for the festival. Then we went to Atlanta. We were the closing film for that festival, won the audience award. Everything was going gangbusters. Samuel Goldwyn Films picked it up for distribution. And then COVID shut everything down. And so, like so many other filmmakers, I was just so depressed. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I felt so bad for Saul and Ruby. We were going to be going to Poland to show the film, to Moscow to show the film. It was just, and everything shut down. So I did not want to go out and film at that point. I turned down a couple of jobs, film jobs, and I decided it was time to turn inward. It was time to tell stories not from looking out and recording other people's stories, but from looking in and diving into what one writer calls the compost heap of memory and experience, and to get into the subconscious. And I got so excited about that idea, and I sat down. I had no idea what would come out. I actually started with a very different story. I started with a father-daughter story they both had a very tumultuous relationship, single dad raising a daughter, in which I have a great deal of experience in. I thought, write what you know. And as I started to write, I felt the need to go into the father's background. And I realized he's the son of two Holocaust survivors. And one of them is Reuven Berkovitz, who's the main protagonist of the story, the umbrella maker's son. And so I got deeper and deeper into Reuven's story, and it took over. It completely took me over. I just fell into his story. I shoved the father-daughter story to the side and started writing a historical novel. I realized later how impacted I had been by making Saul and Ruby's Holocaust Survivor Band. It just, yeah, it just impacted me so deeply, and deep enough where that became the novel I was writing. It's not their stories, but there are elements, obviously. There are elements of their stories. And I had such a strong feeling being in Krakow, which is where my family came from. They actually came from Warsaw, but they're of Polish Jewish descent. To be there, to be able to walk on the cobblestones that were the same cobblestones that were there in 1939, and to see the piece of the ghetto wall that is the same wall that was there in 1939, and on with the buildings and the sidewalks. It visually, yeah, it was all so tangible for me. And also that combined with Saul's stories of being able to point and say, this is where I kicked the soccer ball that went into and broke the guy's window right here, and taking us inside of his building and showing and walking the staircase and hearing the creaky wood and the feeling the same banister that he ran his hand down. I mean, all those details, the smells, where he went to school, where the fishmonger was, where the bakery was, the smells of that. It was all right there and embedded in my memory. And so, yes, it was imperative to be there. Now, with that said, and I have a very strong visual sense, but my challenge, as you know, in writing novels, was to get inside, to write the story not as an observer on the outside and just focusing on external visual details, but to get into the emotional, psychological part of my character. And I started out in third person. The first draft was in third person. And I went through that and I gave it to an editor who I was working with. I knew as a first-time novel writer, I would need some guidance. So got a hold of an editor and worked with her. And she said, you know, you visually beautiful, but you need to get deeper inside of you need to get into the interior of your main character. Okay. So she suggested I do the next draft in close third. So I did close third for the next draft. And I felt myself like, no, I'm not there yet. And so I went to first person. I'm like, I'm going to just put myself in his shoes directly. And that's what resonated for me. Once I put myself in his shoes and I started writing from inside of him, then I was able to get access to his interior world. So that was a very interesting experience for me. And it was thrilling. It was absolutely thrilling. The occupation is yeah, it's a complex experience. As you said, there were some places that were completely annihilated and destroyed, other places that were preserved. Krakow was preserved because that is where the German central government decided to locate themselves. So they moved a lot of politicians and governors into that area to oversee Western and then eventually Eastern Poland, and then eventually they were trying to get in, obviously break Russia. But that's where they put that government to kind of oversee the East. And that's one of the reasons why Krakow was so well preserved, whereas, like I said earlier, Warsaw was completely flattened. Going into the countryside, you know, that Ruby from the film had been separated from his family and had at 10 years old got separated as his family was trying to cross the border to the east into Russia for safety. Western Poland, you know, Stalin and Hitler had agreed to divide Poland in half. early on, and they had a pact, which then Hitler broke eventually and invaded the East. But before he broke that pact, um, crossing the line between Eastern and Western Poland, could save your life. That's what they were trying to do. That's what they did. His parents and family did get across, but he got left behind. He got separated at the border. It was total chaos, and he ended up being hidden on a farm. So that idea that it was the similar scenario with Reuven and his family. I don't want to give away any spoilers. I'll just say Reuven ended up uh, in the East, and he got across the border and was wounded at the time and saved by this farmer. And it's, I mean, I think that part of the story is interesting because it's a strange relationship. He was saved by the farmer, but the farmer saved him not because he felt so bad for him. He saved him with the idea that he would be free labor for him. That's where that started. So, it was a very practical decision. His wife was anti-Semitic. She wanted to get rid of Reuven. They both knew he was Jewish, and the Stanislav, her husband, insisted, no, 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 let's help him heal, and he'll be extra labor for us. And they were poor; they needed more labor. They wanted to, build their farm up, and so that was the premise with that. But then it changed; it shifted during that relationship, and Reuven and Stanislav ended up developing a father-son relationship. Yet there was still that aspect of always being used as a laborer. And then, as you know, he eventually had to escape the farm and go back to Krakow. Reuven, it was fascinating for me to walk in his shoes as he experienced all of these different forms of loss, different forms of humiliation, different forms of degradation. What kept him going? Why is it sometimes there were some losses that were so traumatic that he was just completely numb. There were other losses that made him want to consider ending his life. There were other losses that infuriated him and made him want to fight. So it's that, to me, it's not something I plotted out. I really tried to stay in the moment and deal with the challenges that would come up with him from scene to scene and situation to situation. And his love for Zelda, who early on in the story disappears. She doesn't disappear. Her family escapes Krakow early on, and they lose touch with each other. But she is always there for him, and his desire, his hunger to reunite with her. They were engaged to get married. Is always there. It's a driving force. It helps fuel his resilience. Where does his resilience come from? I mean, it comes from his undying love for Zelda and desire to reunite with her, but also it's just a piece of his will. His own will to live is that driving force as well. This idea of resilience is really interesting to me because that's something I talked a lot about with Saul and Ruby from the film. How did you keep going? How did you survive this and that? And Saul, it was difficult for him to articulate what it was. He said, all I can tell you is, first of all, at one point I asked him, what percentage of your survival was skill and intelligence, and what percentage was luck? He said, 1,000% luck. 1,000% luck. He said, but yeah, and he had one story after another. If he hadn't walked out the door, if he walked out a minute earlier, he would have been dead. If he had crossed the street 5 minutes later, he would have been dead. If he hadn't met this person at that moment, at that time, he would have been dead. And he had endless stories like that. So luck and chance, which is something Reuven is aware of, plays into it. And then there's just, inexplicable desire to live, to keep living, no matter what.